Okay, so we're now ready to move on to our shadow layer. To do this, we're going to create a new layer that's on top of our line art. We're going to set it to multiply, okay? Then I'm going to come to our line art layer, and I'm actually going to lower the opacity just a little bit so it's not quite as prominent. We really want to start focusing on values here. It's right about there, looks good. Color is fine, okay? So I'm going to be imagining that this guy's lit by sun, which means the shadows are going to have a little bit of a blue look to them. So I'm going to get this nice dark blue color, bring my opacity down, and go ahead and start painting, okay? So now I'm thinking that the light is coming from about this direction. So I want to keep that in mind as I begin to paint. And we're just going to start painting in our shadows. Okay. Now you do want to get somewhat refined at this step. Because, and you know what, before I move on, I need to use a different brush. I'm going to use, I want this to look smooth, so let's try the charcoal block brush, see if that works. If not, we'll try something else. I'll bring the opacity down though, so it's not quite so bright. And I already don't like that. Let's try, let's just go with the regular old round brush actually. I think that will have to do. So, you want to think about what direction the light's coming from. Okay. And the forms and things like that as you do this step, because you want it to feel three-dimensional, okay? So if the light's coming from that top left corner, then I need to light that accordingly with all my shadows and stuff like that, okay? So that's what I'm thinking about as I do this. And you're probably going to want to zoom in and get pretty close on this part because you want to be able to pick up on a lot of detail and start getting a little bit more specific. Okay. Okay. Inside his mouth, we're going to start over here getting underneath these horns. And you know what? We're actually going to leave these horns alone because the way we're going to render them is going to be a little bit different than everything else. So we're going to end up doing those in their own separate layer because we kind of want to bring a little bit of translucency to them. So I'm going to leave them alone for now. And we'll come back and work on them later towards the end. Let's come down here under his neck. Alright, I'm making sure I get each individual wrinkle and fold here because I really want it to be able to have a lot of detail when we get to our final layer, and so I'm trying to get more and more refined with each passing layer here. Okay. Alright, we're going to come over here and get this shoulder part here. His fingers here. I'm going to get the detail in here, start to refine some of these shapes by punching in some of these shadows. It's looking good here. Alright, so time to move on to, let's see, what area do we want to work on next? Let's do this other arm down here before we forget about it. Okay, excellent. Where to next? Let's see, we got some spots here on his neck we can detail out a little bit more, I think. Push things a little bit darker here in his chest and stomach area and his neck. Okay, and probably down here a little bit more too. Okay, shadow from his arm onto his leg. Okay, bringing in these shadows here. Alright, so moving up on here to the shoulder. At least the shoulder of his wing joint. Alright, so I'm just filling in the shadow here under his wings, pushing that a little bit darker. Okay. On this other wing over here, we'll get a little bit of shadow underneath. Let's see, what else are we missing? The tail here. Need to fill that in. Alright, so there's a little bit more dimension and depth to his tail. We need to do, we're about done, we just need to do the log that he's on. So first we're going to start with the actual cast shadow from him standing on it. And then we can go ahead and come back and do any of the actual wood texture. Getting the log here. I'm thinking about it in large shapes first, and then going in and getting some of the smaller shapes and textures in afterwards. Right, so first and foremost I'm thinking of it as a large cylinder, and then I can go in and define some of the smaller textures and shapes that are in there in the wood. Alright, so that looks good enough for the log. And just looking over this one more time, missed a few spots back here on this wing. See if there's anything else we need to get. Maybe a handful of these scales. We'll add some shadow onto the bottom edge. So I'm just touching the bottom of these scales to give them a little bit more form and depth. So they feel like there's a little bit of some three-dimensionality to them. Some of these scales back here on his back leg. Just touching some shadows on the bottom of those as well. It's not super dark either, right? I don't want these to be too prominent, but I do want them to have a little bit of a raised edge to them. So we're almost finished with these little scales here. There's a few here on his jaw that I want to get. And then a handful on his arm and his wing that we need to do. Then I'm going to just really quick take my smudge tool, and if I see any areas that I think are a little bit too refined or need to be softened down or blended a little bit, I can go back here really quick and redo those. So I'm over here with this vein on his neck. Maybe some of these areas in here that could be a little bit neater. Some of these areas down here under his face. Okay, blending some of these areas on his jaw. Just a few areas that are probably going to be focal points that we want to read a little bit smoother. Have just a little bit more blending to them. Alright, I think that looks good enough for this step. We got all of our rough shadows in, and if we flip that on and off, we can see kind of what that looks like before and after. It's starting to get a little bit of form to it, a little bit of depth, right? So the next step, we can go ahead and start adding our rough lights. So I'll see you guys in the next lecture.